Om du förstår vad jag menar. Det är alltså centrum på stocken, ungdomsåren då. Det har vi en del information om. Och då har vi exempelvis kunnat bestämma att det är med dagens mått mätt ganska tättvuxet virke som var i den gamla kyrkan då. Det är till och med så det kvalar in för högsta klassen av timmer idag då, snickerivirke alltså. Sen vet vi att det var långt timmer också. Där är väggar som är över 11 meter långa. Så man har använt sig av långt timmer. Ja, 11 meter långa stockar och här får vi gå ner återigen i de här svackorna då för att hitta sådana längder då. Och när det blir så långt så har det varit riktigt fin skog alltså. Det förekommer inte idag att man hugger så långt. Halva längden är långt idag.
Ja.
Vi gjorde ett experiment i skogen där vi klöv fram den här taktron. Och det är lite speciellt. Dels är de ju ganska långa, 6,20 och rätt så breda. Så vi börjar med att skrä rundstocken till ett fyrkantigt block. 8 tum brett och sen maximal bygghöjd på det. Och sen gjorde vi en märgklyvning så vi fick 2 halvor. 2 4-tums bitar. Och sen klöv vi de 2 ytterligare en gång då. Så vi fick 4 2-tums bitar. Och det var ett ganska häftigt experiment. För det känner i alla fall inte jag till att någon har gjort i modern tid.
Okay, so what you did see was some 6-7 years ago, taking down timber in a forest where we have old trees, straight growing trees that could be used for the timber. And what Robert, the first guy, is talking about is the good quality of the original timber, which is today just remaining as burnt pieces, small pieces, the middle parts of the timber, and it's very densely, the annual rings are very densely grown. So it's a high quality timber that is difficult to get hold of today. We don't have that kind of forestry today that produces this kind of timber. It's also long, it's 11 meters. Timber parts in the original church were 11 meters, so it's also kind of problem to find that kind of quality today. And the second guy is talking about the producing of construction timber from the logs by using medieval technology in a certain pattern. How do you divide a log into construction timber following a certain pattern where you make the best use of the center parts of the log, which are the best parts, because there you have all the turpentine and all the preservatives of the timber that makes the timber long lasting in the construction. So today this church is almost finalized, and there is a website to the church that provides you with perhaps some ideas about it, and we could put that into the chat eventually. that website address. So the Craft Laboratory has a number of films on YouTube. Of course, nothing is in English, it's in Swedish. So you need to look for Craft Laboratory in Swedish, which is a totally hopeless word. I would not say to you. Okay.
Okay, well, listen, that's very nice. I have looked at some of the videos and they're absolutely worth looking at. And before you all joined us, we were talking a little bit about it, and Bosse was saying that that they involve their students with professional filmmakers to learn how to document the work, and just how valuable a tool that is, given the role that media plays, film media in particular, in terms of education nowadays. And so it's really important that we get that right. Particularly filming processes that are not going to be repeated necessarily within our lifetimes. They're all unique moments. So anyway, I want to welcome you all to this, the last of the lectures in the Uniscape series, online series of talks where the disciplines meet. The last of the talks before the summer break. So we're not going to see you again until September, and we're delighted to be ending on a high note. So today's paper is a joint paper by Sándor, Némethy and Bosse, Largerqvist, who is going to actually deliver the paper. So Bosse is the associate professor in the Department of Conservation in the University of Gothenburg. His expertise ranges from matters to do with landscape and in theme and thread, very closely following the principles, the philosophy and the aspirations of the European Landscape Convention itself, and how that has evolved over the last 20 years. As you have just been the pleasure of being witnesses to his expertise on heritage recording. His PhD, in fact, was on, if I'm correct, on the use of photogrammetry in the conservation of heritage. And this is a really, really valuable tool that has been used all over the world now. And in fact, it's not that difficult to use either. He has worked in the area of industrial and maritime heritage as well. And while on sabbatical, did a lot of work on the use of heritage in conflict resolution, which I think is a very important dimension. We haven't explored that. But it is some cultural heritage, and he is the University of Gothenburg's representative for Uniscape. An earlier conference that he ran in his career was instrumental in the creation of the Association of Cultural Heritage Studies, which is now a worldwide organization with chapters in all over the world. Well worth having a look at the website there. And as the members of Uniscape will be aware, even from the talks we've had so far in the series, there's a very, very close connection between landscape and heritage, which is one that we're constantly exploring and examining from all sorts of different angles as well. He has a long list of publications. I won't go into the detail. I downloaded some of them already to have a look at. So that's something that others can do as well. Respondend is May East, who is a self-described edge worker. May is a sustainability educator and regenerative designer. As an edge worker, she inhabits the meeting place between government and society, between place and people, a place that she calls, in a term that she coined herself, the sociotome. She is a fellow of UNITAR, which is the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and works on the Sustainability Development Goals agenda, with a worldwide footprint. I think you work in 49 different countries around the world, which is impressive in its own right, but made even more impressive by the fact that you're based in the gorgeous eco-village in Findhorn in Inverness in Scotland, from where you're speaking to us today. Your contribution has been internationally acclaimed, and as we were mentioning before we went on air, it's a real honor and pleasure to have you here. But I would be remiss in not saying as well that originally you're from Brazil, from not too far from Sao Paulo, where you began your career as a singer-songwriter as well. So this is all to your benefit. So you will be our respondent after the talk. So the floor is now yours, Bosse.
I will also just point out that actually Sándor and I will share the presentation.
You'll share the presentation. Okay.
So I will do roughly the first half, and then we switch to Sándor.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's
the second half. And Sándor was the presenter last time.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps everyone knows Sándor. He's also co-responsible with me for the Sumcola Erasmus Plus partnership.
Right.
But I will start with sharing my screen. So I hope you see this all right. I will now change. I don't see any people. So I think we have all the questions by the end. And the clock is running, and I don't know if we need to be absolutely finalized by 6:30 Central European Summertime, or if we could prolong a little. But all the same, Sándor and I have worked together in a number of years, and this is something that emanates from Sándor's activity around the Lake Balaton, and my activities with him in the Erasmus Plus partnership. So starting with where we could find this Lake Balaton and the Ecomuseum around the Lake Balaton, it's kind of centrally positioned in Central Europe, and it's under establishment. So it's not the kind of existing Ecomuseums yet, but it's under establishment with support from Interreg fundings, from Hungarian governmental funds, but also from our Erasmus Plus partnership, Sumcola, which is an acronym for Sustainable Management of Cultural Landscapes. So Ecomuseum, what is that? Well, it's something that a French museologist started when he understood that there were things, there were heritage sites, there were memories disappearing from the cultural and social environment. It needs kind of saved, or at least being more visible. And the traditional museum, which is a building somewhere in an urban context with collections and experts, and where visitors are expected to come and see and take part of what the experts in the collections are representing. Roche-Henri Rivière instead thought of that it should be rather bringing the museum out in the environment, out in the region, out to the people. So we have this geographical area where we have a number of sites representing different perspectives of the heritage in the area, like what we saw in the video initially, that represents the kind of tacit knowledge, the tacit intangible heritage of the craft skills, for instance. But could be a lot of different properties, like we see here representing the area around Lake Balaton. But not the least the people that are working and using the landscape, and through their activities are creating memories and narratives that are kind of a co-creation of heritage and meanings and values. But looking at the Ecomuseum and trying to understand the concept, we could see that it's often linked with the notion of territory. Like we see a number of articles presenting discussions on Ecomuseum. So the territory is a kind of idea of the Ecomuseum, and it could be like visibly materialized, like in the image we see below, where we have a cultural reserve south of Gothenburg. It's a small village here. You could see some houses. It's 4 farmsteads creating a village, and it's their agricultural land we could see here, and also their outlying land with forest belonging to this village. So this is the territory of the village. But going to the territory, looking at that as a concept, and what kind of connotations do we get from that concept, it's a little bit disturbing. It's connotations that directs the interest or the understanding towards ownership or control, jurisdiction, restriction, etc. And following Peter Davies, which has one of the writers and academics that have put a lot of focus on the concept of ecomuseums, he thinks that this territory understanding of ecomuseums brings on ideas of closed systems, of exclusion, of competition, of cultural dominance, which is kind of contradictory to the idea of the ecomuseum. Instead, he brings forth the idea of the sense of place, that we shouldn't look at how to exclude people from taking part of co-creation of the environment. So the sense of place is something that is a number of sites, of phenomena, of occurrences in a community, within an environment, where the community, the engagement of the community is what binds these different issues together into an ecomuseum. So the sense of place is kind of important to understand the nature of an ecomuseum in comparison with a traditional museum in an old building. And this sense of place is something that occurs within a space. And the space could then be understood as an open and evolving structure or framing or whatever we could call it, where we have a number of possible past and future stories, and never-ending amount of possible past and future stories that relate to place and the sense of place. So this is a kind of understanding of the ecomuseum as something very wide and holistic, building on place and space, that for the ecomuseum results in an understanding that the ecomuseum is building on the qualities of the past, on the properties of the present, for the opportunities of the future, based on a holistic understanding of the landscape. So it's really an encompassing activity. So within this heritage, and the notion of heritage is fundamental. We're talking about museum, we're talking about heritage sites. We understand that, okay, we need to address what is heritage. And one way of looking at heritage is that it is material properties. That could be different objects, it could be buildings, it could be parts of the landscape, but there are material properties that gets meanings, got values, that got different energies through their interactivity with the socio-cultural processes. So there's an interlink between the material properties and the intangible qualities of the material properties. And to understand it from a societal viewpoint, we need to see that this is also something that includes the formal handling and management of those material and intangible properties and qualities from the formal societal bodies and organizations working with that, eventually designating something as heritage. So this is kind of what Laura Jane Smith describes in her book Uses of Heritage 15 years ago as the authorized heritage discourse, the formal top-down process of producing heritage. And this is not a neutral activity. We could look at this as something that is based in the present society. It's something that urges the society to define heritage. Could be different needs. These needs could be positive needs. It could be something that is for the benefit of people, but it could also be more negative ideas of excluding people, of empowering a group on behalf of other people. So we could, for instance, in Europe, we could see some disturbing tendencies of nationalistic movements or right-wing movements trying to grab the notion of heritage as an instrument for legitimacy or for power or for righteousness. But working with heritage, we addresses history, we addresses the past, but the past is imagined. It's always interpreted, and we look at the past through a number of different filters, and we don't actually have full knowledge about the past ever. If we had that, all the historical departments at all universities worldwide would have nothing to do, because there's nothing new to understand of the history. So the history, the past, is something that we interpret, it's something that we have imagination about, and the filters are something that we are constantly creating and changing, so we got different understandings of the past. And within the heritage profession, you could always hear that, okay, we are doing this, we are preserving this for future generations. So there is a direction towards the future, and the future is as well something that is imagined. It's something that we interpret. It's something that is not here yet. And we are doing that through more or less the same kind of filters. So we are producing filters to look back in time and look forward in time to motivate why are we doing things we call heritage. But what we are really doing is addressing contemporary needs. So heritage is always the response for something that is taking place in the present society. And based on that, we could say that the notion of heritage, to work with heritage, is in that respect always contested. It's always something that we need to understand. Why do we need that kind of heritage now? And there is a normal tendency that we in general look upon heritage as an outcome. There is an object, there is a specific landscape, or it's a building, but something has been designated as heritage. So it's the outcome of the process. So the process producing these outcomes is something that could be interesting to look into. And I want to use 3 articles to get an idea about how could we understand those processes that results in heritage. And the first article I would say something about is Dean Sully. And Dean Sully is the guy with the camera in the photo, talking to 2 of my colleagues at the department. And he's an academic of the University College in London. The second article is George Jansen and his colleagues from the Netherlands that produced an article of heritage in spatial planning and the role of heritage, why Dean Sully talks about conservation practices relating to heritage from a museum perspective. And the last one is Gregory Ashworth's article for 10 years ago, where he discusses a number of paradigms that he thinks or could understand have been ruling how heritage has been created over time. So all these articles have something in common. They define that the processes or the perspectives or the paradigms that have been ruling how heritage have been defined could be divided in 3 different sections. So Dean Sully talks about materials-based, values-based, peoples-based conservation. Jox Jansen and colleagues talks about heritage as a sector, factor, vector, while Gregory Ashworth defines 3 different paradigms: the preservation paradigm, the conservation paradigm, and the heritage paradigm. And these are more or less following upon each other, but also more or less parallel in time. And what Gregory Ashworth defines as they represents incomplete paradigm shifts. So we could, if we recognize how they describe these different perspectives, we could recognize that they are more or less perhaps present in today's formal activities of designating heritage. But we could, if we group them together, so we have Ashworth, the yellow, Johnson and Company, the orange, and Solly, the blue. And there are three different perspectives or paradigms. We could see how they fall out in relation to some chosen key concepts, like the goal of activities, or the justification of activities, or the focus of activities, or the authenticity, the role of authenticity, or the actors who are doing this. So if we are looking at these, we could see that the left-hand column there is where we find the more or less traditional way of understanding heritage, a neutral materials fixated look on heritage, where we find the authenticity in the materials, and it's very much a top-down process with experts. And we could relate it to the 19th century nation making in Europe, where you need to find monumental properties that gives legitimacy to the new nation. The center column is more of heritage as something that is possible to use. It's still a kind of top-down process from the heritage point of view, experts defining the values, but they are interacting with other stakeholders, representing other experts in different fields, where one negotiates about possibilities in using heritage in a wider area. And the last column on the right hand represents heritage as a bottom-up process, a peoples-based or human-centered approach to work with heritage, where the authenticity is more in the experience or in the narratives or in how we could use the heritage instead of going to the museum and look at the heritage behind glass. And all these are more or less coexisting. And we could summarize these three different perspectives in this graph. So we have two tensions. One tension between the individually to the collectively oriented, and another tension between the knowledge and emotionally based. And in the different squares, we get different ideas or needs of heritage. So we have a monumental idea, a monumental need of heritage, the 19th century nation making in Europe, for instance, slowly developing into an academic profession towards the end of the 19th century, where one needs heritage as empirical data, empirical evidence of historical factors, and the heritage could be providing that kind of data. Going over to the post-war period, where heritage is increasingly more important for broader societal functions and the adaptive reuse of buildings, requiring also the involvement of people, focusing eventually to the individual heritage or the individual need of heritage. And if we put into this graph the different articles and their way of defining heritage, we could see that here we have the traditional understanding of heritage slowly developing during 19th century to a more academic, traditional academic scholarly idea, where one develops the notion of the developable heritage, growing from that academic area towards a more instrumentally based idea, the local community's need of reusing heritage sites for different purposes of developing local economy, etc. Eventually relying on the local engagement, which eventually leads to the idea of the individual need for doing heritage and co-creation of heritage. So for instance, in the island of Gotland on the east coast of Sweden, we could, in a week in summer, play medieval time, for instance, or we could, like the steampunks, create something that is historically, but it's not historically, but it's addressing some notions of the past. So here we have the complexity of processes and ideas resulting in heritage. And the need for us today is to actually being able to combine these into a more coherent, consistent practice. We need to be able to preserve properties following the more traditional formula of heritage design assignment. But we need also being able to use heritage as an asset for societal development, as an asset for developing local economies. But we also must rely on the local engagement to actually get people involved and engaged in their heritage. What we see, the picture here is in the northwest corner of the Sicily. It's an heritage site, but it's also an economic site. The piles you see here is sea salt. So this is an industrial site for producing sea salt, which also carries a lot of heritage. So this kind of areas, we need to be able to combine a number of different processes and perspectives into a consistent practice. So the challenges of this practice is that if we look at heritage practices, they are possible to describe as embedded boxes. So we have people working with artifacts, we have people working with buildings, etc., up to natural landscape, and these differences in boxes also represent different organizational structures, different professions, different educational backgrounds, different possibilities of public funding, etc. And not always are they aligned with each other. They could be in conflict with each other, but they share that they are dependent on the society in general and how the society in general understands, discusses, and defines concepts like resource economy, recycling, etc. And that is the outcome of sociocultural processes. So I tell my students that if you want to be successful, you really need to work with the sociocultural processes, because if you could change them in your favor, then you could get a lot of different benefits out of that. If we could integrate them into each other, we could see that the more we integrate them, the more complex heritage dynamics will we have. But at the same time, there's an opportunity that this could actually, hypothetically, increase the resilient opportunity, resilient possibility of society. But the need for doing that is that we need to have an integrated approach. And that integrated approach must be something that addresses the central challenges of our time and are place-specific and are meaningful for people, like the 17 development goals from the United Nations. And I think that this is the kind of role the Ecomuseum could have. So before leaving the word to Sándor, we could then kind of summarize so far that the Ecomuseum is the merging of landscape and cultural heritage. And this is perceived to be made by a number of principal layers that kind of constitutes the general frame of the Ecomuseum. And within these layers, there are a number of sub-layers that provides meaning, that provides development potentials, that provides engagement and participatory functions, that are the kind of engine or the energy of the Ecomuseum. So we could say that within the Ecomuseum, we have heritage. And what is heritage? Well, I want to see heritage as a process, an everlasting process based on the community. And that process creates the space for places, stories, activities that enhances the creativity, the inclusive and sustainable development. So that is heritage, perhaps not primarily the outcome, but the process, providing constant outcomes. And we have the cultural landscape. And this is the definition that we reached in the Erasmus Plus partnership on SUMCULA, the Sustainable Management of Cultural Landscape, that the cultural landscape is a geographic area with all its cultural and natural resources, the wildlife and domestic animals, natural and artificial ecosystems, the built and intangible heritage therein, continuously shaped by historic and present-day evolutionary processes, including the adverse or beneficial impacts of human activities, social relations, and evolving cultures which mirror the evolutionary trends of human society. So this is where I was to try to grasp the holistic approach of understanding the cultural landscape. This leads us over to the content and details of the Balaton Ecomuseum. So now I put down my share screen and gives over to Sándor. I don't know if you're muted, Sándor. We don't hear you.
Unmute. unmuted now?
No, we hear you.
Do you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Okay. So, my friends, so the Balaton Ecomuseum is a very special one, as Bosse has already pointed out very well. This is maybe the very first of ecomuseums which is totally built on the cultural landscapes due to its multi-layered structure. Because we started from the geodiversity and the geomorphology and the historical geology through the vegetation cover, the population, the natural resources, which were very much determinative for the formation of the environment and the artificial environment as well around the lake during its barely 20,000 years history. So the Lake Balaton is not that old. However, the processes which form the lake can reach back to the Permian-Triassic boundary about 250 million years, which are visible on the surface. But the Lake Balaton, in fact, is a lake which was formed due to tectonic processes in 4 basins. One basin is the Western Basin, the middle one. There is the third basin, which is also quite shallow basin, while the last one, the smallest one, is the Casthay Basin. So these basins were not even one lake for a long time. So it was a very interesting process. But from the time humankind started to settle around the lake, and we have archaeological records here, so it is it goes back to about 8,000 years when we can see more remains, but very much about the Roman times, where we have also very interesting excavation and archaeological sites here. So the area of the Balaton Ecomuseum is 8,500 square kilometers. Why it is so big, I will soon explain. And it has quite a lot. Only the key settlements are about 60, 70 settlements, which are quite determinative in terms of infrastructure, heritage, local cultures, tourism, and also very much regarding the natural landscape. So how have we created the Balaton Ecomuseum? In fact, the original plan was to, which was triggered by international project. It was the cultural recovery project, which in fact started from Italy. And it was how to preserve the intangible cultural heritage through the activities of ecomuseums. And the Lake Balaton Development Coordination Agency was a partner here, and I was asked to, as an expert, to set up this system because we had a basic problem. If something has an activity, then that one which has an activity should exist. But no Balaton Ecomuseum existed, but a lot of activities and organizations which had ecomuseum-like structures were around the lake, but we needed a more comprehensive, more systematic structure. So the first was, of course, the natural geography, because we cannot disregard the natural environment. That is the most important and most basic one. Similarly, we cannot disregard the social and cultural environment, because these create one single system. So we had the hydrographic catchment area of Lake Balaton, which is fairly large. In fact, 5,180 square kilometers totally, including the hydrographic catchment area. And we talk about a basin, which is 596 square kilometer alone. So Lake Balaton is the unifying factor of the Ecomuseum. And of course, we had the touristic planning area. In fact, around the Lake Balaton, which also includes a few very important settlements, for instance, Veszprém. Then the Bosse in Balaton UNESCO Global Geopark, not the whole of it, but the close part of it, which is more relevant to Lake Balaton. And of course, which is a key activity, the wine growing. Well, of course, wine is a very important substance, not only because wine is the Trojan horse of intellectuality, since in one glass wine, you have the whole cultural heritage of humankind, a little bit from religion to science, art, and music, and even natural sciences, and all tricks and arts and traditions of agriculture. So it is an excellent opportunity to utilize this. And of course, so the different wine regions around the Lake Balaton constitute also a key part of the Balaton Ecomuseum. Nonetheless, the fact that the wine industry is a very fast developing branch of agriculture, and I did use the word industry, which we don't like so much, because the industrial scale agriculture is sometimes monoculture, and it is targeting a big profit in short time and a big production, whereas in areas like Lake Balaton, we have an intensively growing amount of organic agriculture. Also very important to look at the differences. Why do we have so many wine districts around the Lake Balaton? Well, this is based on the geology and the soil development. Here you have a more, here you have quite a lot of Permian red sandstone, which is 250 million years old, and up on that, the Triassic dolomite limestone. Here you have a similar origin with quite a lot of lush as well, and silt. And you have the volcanic provinces around the Lake Balaton here, and quite around the southern shore, only a couple of volcanic outcrops. All the other parts are more clay, marl, and quite a lot of alluvial deposits in the Zala vine region. So it is a very, very interesting part, and it decided also the activities and also the crafts linked to agriculture, linked to construction work, linked to the settlements. A wide range of cultural heritage could be identified here, rooted in the natural environment, which was determinative for the formation of settlements and society around the lake. So this is basically Balaton Ecomuseum puzzle. If you look at the geodiversity, it is quite fantastic. You can see the Triassic remains of limestones, the karstic scenery in the close to Balaton and the Ridge, which is in fact a dripstone cave, not as big as the northern part of Hungary, but still is really impressive. And you can see the fairly young volcanic formations, which came in the late Miocene, which was in the about 8 million years ago, until the early Pliocene, about 4 million years ago, when the Lake Balaton was still a vast area of different marshlands, not in the shape of today's lake. And volcanic intrusions came through here and met the quite wet and thick sedimentary layers, which resulted in the so-called phreatomagmatic volcanism, resulting in fantastic basaltic formations like this. They're called Hegyestő, which is today a geopark. This used to be a mine when basalt, basic basalt, in fact, in this part of the country, was mined for building material and for road cover. And you can see the volcanic landscapes here of Lake Balaton. It's the so-called volcanic witness mountains. Why are they called witness mountains? Because when these volcanic intrusions drilled through the thick sedimentary layers, the basalt poured out on the sediment there, and like a hard cap was sitting on the sediments. Then the sediment eroded away partly, but the sedimentary structures underneath these volcanic caps, these basaltic caps, remained. So if you drill through the mountain, you can find the sediments at the time of the volcanic eruption. So it is really, really interesting. And this resulted in a very fertile landscape you can see around the Lake Balaton. Of course, the biodiversity is vast. So you can see a fantastic vegetation. Some of them are really rare. And bird sanctuary around the Kis Balaton, which is going to be, I suppose, today it is already a Ramsar site, but it might be also a kind of World Heritage site because the ancient extension of a marshland in the western part of the Lake Balaton has been reconstructed. And you can see, of course, a lot of wild boars and large animals as well, birds and insects. And of course, as I mentioned, the wetlands around Lake Balaton. This was the water levels. If you look at the lake in the 18th century, the water levels were so big, as you can see here around the lake, 110 meters above the Baltic Sea level. And in that time, this peninsula, which is called Tihanyi, was not a peninsula, it was an island. And it was also similar, very much similar to that before this time during the 16th and 17th century when we had the Little Ice Age and quite a lot of precipitation and vast marshlands around the lake. And the Kis Balaton or Little Balaton, which is today a beautiful reconstruction of the original marshland, it was very important because it turned out that those previous marshlands were not that good for agriculture, but the drainage of these marshlands reduced the ecological safety of the lake. And the biological filter mechanisms could not work as they should. So today you can see from this aerial photograph, the marshland has been reconstructed in several steps, as you can see here. This is the big lake of Balaton. These are on the top. These are the different parts of the Little Balaton, which is a very important touristic area, but very much protected. So not all the places are accessible for tourists, only a few sites, because you need to protect the nesting place for birds, for instance, and the unique nature. And of course, the agriculture on the lake is very important, looking at the agriculture sites. But you can see quite a lot. This is one of the most beautiful sites here. You can see from the Gergely winery close to Zanka in the middle part of Lake Balaton and the northern shore. They are organic producers. And these houses are fairly new built in the exact style of the original buildings, of course, equipped with all comfort what a modern person or a tourist can imagine, yet a lot of the original character has been preserved. Sometimes very old wine cellars have been extended. And this is a typical cold board for wine tastings around the lake. And of course, you have a network of forestry schools here, which is really an opportunity for children and for young people, but also for others, for everybody, to learn about the forests, the culture, the hunting, the nature conservation projects, and of course also very much about the cultural heritage. We can mention here the horse keeping and the equestrian tourism, which is built on a 1,000 years old tradition of the Hungarian culture. And we shall not forget about the built heritage. When you can see the Örségen National Park, which is on the western part of the Balaton hydroelectric catchment area, original wooden houses, which are plastered from outside. In Keszthely, it is the western tip of Lake Balaton, the Festetics Castle, which is the Croatian-Hungarian Count family, the Festetics family, who made a lot for the Lake Balaton. Or the Baroque remains. This has been now very, very nicely refitted. This is the wine cellar on the Sándor Hill and the so-called Lengyel Chapel. And this is the view, an aerial view of the western part of Lake Balaton, basically not so far from the Hegyestő. This is the castle of Sümek. There are a number of castles around the lake. These are Roman remains, which are being excavated now. And this is from the top of the Csabanc mountain, where only a few remains of a castle remained, but the view is absolutely beautiful. And of course, we shall not forget about the crafts, which are very, very important. One of the main tasks of the Ecomuseum is to preserve the crafts. There are special culture civil organizations which keep alive, for instance, the textile industry. This is Gergely Szabó, which in the Szabó winery, they are organic winemakers. You can see here the craft. And of course, the herbs and spices, which is almost a natural consequence of the Lake Balaton, since it has also a 1,000-year-long tradition, and the lore of herbs has been developed perfectly to a not only tourist facility, but also to education center by Ferenc Takács and his son Tamás Takács, who made the Zanka Herb Valley, which is today a very well developed educational center, and will be also the center of the herbal roots of the Ecomuseum. And we shall not forget about bath culture. So this is an ancient picture in the end of the 19th century about Lake Balaton, which has been developed today to modern places and bath places, which is in Balatongyörök, one of the most beautiful strands, or the thermal lake. We shall not forget about that the Lake Balaton's western edge is on the western thermal belt of Hungary, with a number of thermal lakes. One of those is the most famous, the Hévíz Lake, which is the largest natural thermal lake in Balaton, on which a bathhouse has been built. It is accessible in winter and summer, and even winter when you have about quite a few minus centigrades outside, people can take a bath in the lake and swim around the lotus flowers. And of course, sailing is allowed on the Balaton, but motorboats are not allowed here. And basically, what is the plan of the Balaton Ecomuseum? If you look at the structure, how it is being built up, so you can see that we have the estimation stage when we had a primary complete context space for the heritage properties, qualities, and narratives. And also we did quite a lot of field work, dialogue with the residents and the civil organizations, of course. In the preparation stage, we explored the tangible and intangible resources, which in fact today cannot be separated from each other. We planned for managerial routines, both formal as well as peoples-based, because you need to start from the stakeholders, not to be the wise big wizard who are coming into place and telling you what to do. These are really important that we base this on the people. Promoting regional supportive structures, heritage properties and qualities to be preserved and developed, including interpretation facilities and visitor centers, i.e. a lot of interactive sites, and we are planning also, and they are being developed now, softwares which you can download on your mobile phone. It is guiding you through the whole Ecomuseum and all layers and all sides. So that is what I'm saying now, that this Ecomuseum will be unique because it is not grouped around one single activity like pottery, like herbs or ironworks, which is in fact is beautiful in Sweden. A state of the art is the large Ecomuseum of Bergslagen, but it is group. The main theme of the Ecomuseum is ironworks and its history. But in this case, we are looking at the whole cultural landscapes. We are looking at the bricks, but it is very important to emphasize that the mortar between the bricks, when we are talking about a building, is equally as important. And this mortar is, in fact, the cultural heritage, which is giving the shape of a cultural landscape. And if you look at the organization, then you can see the original idea of the Ecomuseum, that you have an in situ preservation, you have a local development, and the community participation, which are going hand in hand. Now, when we looked at the strategy and activities, we had a few objectives. The objective one was, basically, objective 1 and 2 was creating inventories. One was the natural and agricultural resources, including the protected areas, and inventory of existing and potential tourist products, intangible heritage in agriculture and possible links to tourist products. And the objective 3 was development of interactive tourist products linked with intangible heritage, but this was related to the natural resources and the built heritage and the history in one system. Now, then we had these actions. Action 1 to 6 was the resource inventory. You get the geological, botanical, water, agriculture, forestry and wildlife and protected areas. Then the trades and crafts, building and construction, and very important, the vessels. The shipbuilding in the Lake Balaton. It was a vast historic development. We could keep several hours long lecture about it, how the shipbuilding industry and how the boat traffic developed on this shallow lake, which has an average depth about 3.5 meters only in the vast area. And the assessment and the development actions 1 to 10, the tourist products, trades and crafts, including the revitalization of the ancient crafts, which is going to enhance the population holding capacity of the countryside, which is a worldwide trend, the headless urbanization and the depopulation of the countryside, which is resulting to the degradation of incredible variable cultural heritage. We're talking about the equestrian products, building restoration. The thermal bath culture is vast but very important to keep it at the right pace. And the facilities for regional development and innovation. So, of course, we are going, it is resulted in interactive packages, also stakeholder mapping. You need to understand the local paradigm, and you need to understand how to do a social marketing to make your project accepted. Because people are forgetting that they are part of nature. And then we had the pilot actions. One was the databases built on these inventories. Then the key areas responsibilities, the management structure, Ecomuseum, to find a legal form, and will be probably in the cluster in the beginning, stakeholder participation. And of course, we shall not forget about the companies and businesses which are on there. They have a corporate social responsibility. And not to forget about one, a landscape observatory which we are planning. It will be a big one now, which we are planning, the Trans-Danubian Landscape Observatory, where the Lake Balaton will be a part. But it is important, it is decision support for a wider region. It is possible to reuse the tourist pressure to develop infrastructure programs in harmony with nature and heritage conservation. So the Balaton Ecomuseum is in fact, which network provides and use of data, information, knowledge base in the landscape. We shall not forget that we have a lot of public institutions, local communities, public and private owners of heritage sites, farmers and agricultural spin-off companies, business enterprises, very important.
2 minutes, Sándor, please.
2 minutes?
Yeah.
I will be ready. Education institutions and religious buildings and communities. Now we are looking at the landscape observatory, structured information, and of course, the monitoring functions, which are very, very important to both carry out the construction of Ecomuseum and ensure its smooth operation. So thank you very much for your attention. This was everything I wanted to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we'll hand straight over to our respondent, May East, and then following that, we'll open the paper to the floor for discussion. So May, the floor is yours first. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you, Bosse and Sándor, for the very informative, both in terms of theory and practice. And I'd like to make 3 reflections on what I have heard. First, now taking your perspective, Bosse, around the evolution of the concept. You know, you have the 3 papers that you brought: materials, values, people, sector, factor, vector, preservation, conservation. So you see there is the concept evolves. And if we think about Kuhn, who says that paradigms and practice that define any discipline change when existing solutions no longer work, and rising issues require new approaches. So if you think about, you know, new paradigms need to emerge to deal with new challenges. And we take we are positioned in addressing contemporary needs, but we are always directing towards the future and dedicating our work to the future generations. And then we have the presentation of the Lake Balaton, and we know that Lake Balaton, as many other lakes, are under great pressure because of tourist development, but also because of climate change. There has been various reports saying that the water system is changing and all of that. So I wonder, when we start looking at the concept of Ecomuseum, which is placed in the present towards the future generations, if the paradigm does not need to embrace the perspective of regenerative design, which is designing or co-evolving with a territory, social and also natural systems together. But regeneration meaning bringing more life to the system is not enough preserving what it is, what has been in the past, because we are facing a series of stresses. Climate change is not a localized condition that we have created. So there's going to be, impact in the water, impact into the ecological systems. And so if we adopt a regenerative approach to Ecomuseum, how this would look like? It will look like, because first of all, we are going to be, instead of looking at layers, as you mentioned, we're going to start looking at nested systems and also at proximate holes. You work with the territory, but intentionally, whatever you do in the territory, if it's to bring more life into the system, more vitality, more viability. And vitality means life into the system. Viability means vitality over time. That's what we want. We want to vitalize that Ecomuseum for many generations. So it's vitality over time. So we're designing, thinking about the territory, the proximate whole and the greater whole. So in a nested systems, not like that. And we're not only, trying to, it's not enough to keep this, adopt the SDGs framework to sustain a very fragile balance. We need to start bringing back life into the system. So it's not only enough to aspire to mitigate the effects of human activity. Our role as, those who are developing, and then there is 3 levels of development here that I'm going to conclude with that, but our role is to realize the greatest systemic potential in this biocultural unique place, which is the Lake Balaton or whatever other ecomuseums, allowing ecological and social systems to co-evolve and thrive. So I'm here just opening a door to say, are we going to evolve the Ecomuseum concept and application towards a regenerative approach? Because we are realizing that sustaining, even though that is so meaningful, tradition is so meaningful, but the way, the impact, the Anthropocene age embedded in Lake Balaton needs to invite us into bringing a regenerative approach. So what is the paradigm? What are the set of lenses that could propose an evolving Ecomuseum for many generations to come?
May you grasp the point? You remember when I mentioned the mortar between the bricks, that it can be equally as important. I was exactly thinking about that. Prior to this, I worked also as expert to mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change in the shallow lakes. We had the EU Lakes project, where a few lakes, the Lake Balaton, the Neusiedler Lake in the Hungarian-Austrian border, the Lago di Garda in Italy, and the Jezioro Harikowskie in Poland were part of these studies. And exactly, it was the point was the climate change. And also long-term, we have also written, and a good friend of me, Karol Kotic, has also written an interesting paper about the water quality and water balance of the Lake Balaton, which in shallow lakes is very, very important, because climate change is causing, particularly in these parts of Europe and in parts of the world, longer summers, sometimes drier, shorter precipitation, vast evaporation, and water level drops. So in the year 2003, water level dropped so dramatically that quite a great part of the shallow waters from the southern shore diminished, and we had quite serious problem with the littoral zone of the lake, the littoral zone which is temporarily submerged. There is a natural fluctuation in the lakes of the water level, but which is acceptable. But when you get dried out reed beds, which are vital for the ecological balance of the lake, that is one important thing. The other important issue, too warm water in shallow lakes will result also in oxygen depletion and fish death. And the other one is that it can result in invasive species, which are more tolerant to oxygen-poor environment and higher temperatures. Fourth, which is also quite a big problem, is algal blooming, particularly cyanobacteria, which producing cyanotoxins, and you don't want to be an owner of birthplace where quite a few tourists are dying due to poisoning of cyanotoxins. Or just more questions. Now, regarding the other issue, we are absolutely on the way of the regional. In fact, maybe that's why I was so happy when I have seen that you are working with the regenerative issue, because that is very much at our heart as well, because regenerative issue, one of the biggest regenerative issues around Lake Balaton was the small Balaton itself. We had to regenerate the marshlands which were vanishing to produce biological filters. We have to regenerate the degraded sites, building sites. We have to revitalize traditional trades and crafts and produce, making organic production, revitalizing the handwork, and giving back the value of their life, of the people in the countryside. Not everybody is dashing into the towns and became ants in a big in a big system, losing their identity. So the biggest problem is that, yes, absolutely, the whole strategy of an ecomuseum and a landscape observatory together, because a landscape observatory and the ecomuseum are working together. Regarding the construction of the Balaton Ecomuseum, I was asked a few times as to what extent it is an ecomuseum and as to what extent it is a landscape observatory, because we have a few functions regarding a kind of monitoring and database creation, what landscape observatories have. But the function here is a sustainable touristic product and but it is on the second place, the first and important place to create sustainable living based on a regenerative approach, both in terms of natural environment, conservation and regeneration, and cultural heritage. Yes.
Just a final point is that much more that we are now going to regenerate the territory or the place where there is this vocation is much more building. When you talk about regenerative design, you're talking about building the regenerative capacity of the system to enter into higher or regeneration actually moves systems up to higher orders of expression. So it's much more building the capacity or the capability of regeneration of the territory more than, oh, now we are going to regenerate the territory.
Yes, and the devil is often in the detail, but I think to come back to your original point on the paradigmatic shift of talking about, particularly interested in the background context of the UCLG and the Namur Declaration of 2015, which has cultural heritage as the fourth pillar of sustainable development, and it seems that's the mortar in the bricks. So I just wonder, Bosse, would you like to speak to that again?
Yeah, well, I'm in heritage, so it's natural for me to have a heritage perspective, but it's not unproblematic, as you point out, May. We know that there is different opinions on what is the meaning with heritage. Who should decide we are in cultural reserves and stay there, or should we have an influence of the society in total? And being in heritage and training young people to be heritage professionals, the backside of it, when you talk about heritage as an asset for local economy development and so on, it's normally so that everyone talks about the tourism industry, the destination industry, as the kind of target group for heritage professionals. What we're trying to do is to find other economies. If you saw, for instance, the reconstruction works with the Södra medieval church, we have a lot of people developing their craft skills in a way that actually has a what we could call in strict terms a market quality, a market potential, not only for reconstructing medieval churches or restoring old buildings, but in general, if we talk about the regenerative approach to society in general, there is, at least in my neighborhood in West Sweden, an increasing need for having an idea about the food that I buy is locally produced, have high quality. The buildings I built are built by local carpenters and craftsmen. There is this idea of, we could call quality, that in some respect could be represented by the heritage, depending on how we want to work with heritage. And my notion of heritage is that it builds on the past, absolutely, but it's performed in the present. And we have ideas about the future, but our performance in the present are based on what ideas we have for the future. And that is where I think we will have the regenerative approach, because if our idea about the future is that we need to create a more sustainable society, we need to avoid the loss of biodiversity, we need to increase the quality of life for people, like the people living in the suburbs of Gothenburg, just positioned there, coming from a totally different culture. What kind of life quality could we work with heritage in terms of raising them to something that is more interesting and more important? Like, for instance, one colleague of mine who made the suitcase project. It was in the suburb outside Gothenburg where there happened to be an ancient archaeological remain. So she did archaeological excavation together with the school classes. 10-year-olds, kids took part of that. And since this was a suburb and the school was in the suburb, those kids represented something like 20, 25 different natural backgrounds. They were talking like at least 20 different languages. And they were digging and finding, capsules from a Coca-Cola bottle and an old cigarette, whatever, and, quite recent findings, but represented the story, the history of this place. So they had a discussion continuing on, is this your heritage here? Or what is your heritage? Or are you part of this heritage? Or what do you bring with you? So all these pupils got this assignment that take a suitcase and furnish it with your heritage background, your heritage luggage. And we make an exhibition. So it became a traveling exhibition in the museums of Gothenburg, the suitcases of heritage, what we bring with us, and how that contributes to constantly evolving idea about heritage in our setting. So that is my basic understanding of heritage is something that we meet on and develops from out of our understandings of other people and how we could use that as a positive force, a way of growing and including people into something that is more creative and more possibly regenerative in terms of long-term effects on the society. But that needs to be made in a total shift, a total change of how what Laura Jane calls the authorized heritage discourse, how they work and how they approach people and how people are included and involved in doing things. Like, for instance, the reconstruction of the Serra Roda medieval church was not from the very beginning a clear statement from the National Heritage Board that yes, we should reconstruct it. The first notion from their side was, okay, let's hire a building construction company and they could, build up something that could be the frame for illustrating the medieval church. While we were saying that, no, let's take a chance now and go back in deep to the medieval time and see what could we learn from craft skills at that time. Could we actually recreate craft skills, and what kind of water rings does this create in terms of, for instance, how should we have forests? Like Robert was talking about the quality of the trees in the forest and the quality of how we manage the forest to eventually getting a timber that Kalle Melin could actually use as a timber framer in doing something with, because it has that quality. And that creates the basis for local economies that are not principally addressing tourism, because that is a problem of itself, because tourism industry is not sustainable, regardless of what we are saying about the tourism industry. It's really, really a challenge to make tourism sustainable. So it's not something I would say that this is the future of the heritage to address this, tourism. The future of heritage is to address what might be the bottom-up requirements from an eco-museum perspective that produces opportunities for livelihood of different sorts, that actually uses and works with the landscape in a way that produces a lot of data and information and knowledge about how to do this in a good way, that would then influence decision support systems that could have this long-term perspective of how do we actually develop a sustainable society. Everyone talks about sustainable development, but what does it mean really? And I think that working with heritage in a way where you look about heritage as something that involves people, develops people, let people work with their skills and develop their skills, that is the heritage. That is the heritage alive that creates new heritage, and it's a constant process. So
I think we should,
and that is not the formal heritage organizations that are working with that. It is perhaps the Ecomuseum as a principal thought that might provide the fundament for doing this.
let's open the discussion up to the floor. I think most of you, somewhere along the bottom of your screen, you'll have a line that allows you to raise your hand. If, like me, you don't have one, just raise your hand and we'll invite you to turn on your microphone and to contribute to the discussion. So I see that Maria Bosse Tenaru is there with her hand up straight away. So Maria.
Yes, hello. I am from the Yönmingku University of Architecture and Urban Planning. I want to ask, I listened to this speech because of the Balaton Lake. My grandmother's sister had the holiday apartment in Balaton, and this was then inherited by my mother. So I'm going there since I was 4 years old. Now we sold last year, so we are not going anymore. But I see that the Hungarian Academy has holiday houses in Fűzfő and another one, so close to it. So I hope to, when the pandemic is over, to go again. And I wanted to ask what are the implications for the people there. I wrote it also in the chat on Facebook. There is a group, Balaton Értékmentés, so Balaton Heritage Saving by Károly Banki, where they collect photos and news, for example, when trees are cut and such things. So what is beautiful and what is not beautiful at the same time. And yes, on the 13th of April, there was a conference here in Romania, and I presented what I gathered to festivals at Balaton, because going each year to Balaton at another time, of course, I catch the different things from the days of the place, passing, going with the ship, and so on. So yes, I was happy to see this, but I'm wondering what will happen if there will be an Ecomuseum. Thank you.
Well, shall I answer? Okay, so I would like to say that there is a lot of civil organizations around Lake Balaton which are dealing with heritage and with the protection of lake. And I am very happy that now we are doing these development projects. It was a big gift for me when I met Bosse, because in fact, the whole heritage project and the craft laboratory, quite a lot is Bosse's development, because basically this approach, what Bosse sketched up now, what we need to import from him. And actually, I would like to import Bosse as well more to the Lake Balaton, because what he's doing is really, really brilliant, and we need it.
Yeah.
So basically, there is a system to ensure that what you mentioned, that we preserve and the atmosphere of the Lake Balaton, we handle tourism as it should be. And what you experience when you have been here in Balaton, which is a very interesting part, it is on the eastern edge of the Balaton. And ironically, was one of the big debates, because people tried to block the conservation projects and make big hotels on the place of the reeds, and it was stopped. Thanks God. So the smaller holiday resorts will remain, but I think that now we have a development when this information, this sound conservation will prevail around the lake. So when you are coming next time, you are not going to lose the original spirit, I hope.
Okay, you have the pleasure of knowing you'll be able to go back. Is there anybody else who hasn't contributed so far, has a burning question? Eva, you have your hand up. You need to turn on your microphone.
Thank you. Yes, I had to turn on my micro. So thank you very much, Bosse and Sándor, for these great presentations. I'm from Hungary. I'm dealing with landscape research. We had now a 4-year project on the landscape character assessment of Hungary. Now we will have our closing conference on the 10th of June, and the English papers and presentation as well. And I'm a university professor at the University of Sopron in Transdanubia, and I had a small vineyard on Lake Balaton as well. So I'm very much related to the topic, and I have contacted Sándor recently, and I think that we should keep a few points in mind. there is a lot of tension in this area. First, because in the post-communist countries, we had 40 years of dictatorship, and we can talk on regenerative capacity, but we should talk also on survival capacity. So these countries had done a great job in the last a few decades after the political changes, and it was an enormous task to make understand people that they can participate, that they can have bottom-up initiatives, and around the lake Balaton especially, as it is the Hungarian Sea, how it is called, and the main touristic place of Hungary, as people could not travel outside and abroad formerly. So it was extremely overloaded with touristic facilities on the lake shore. And this Ecomuseum initiative, and still it is overloaded, you should know. And this Ecomuseum idea is extremely important, as it can show another way against the mass tourism, because the mass tourism is really not sustainable. But I think that there are different type of tourism, the slow tourism, ecotourism, rural tourism, etc., which should contribute to the survival of the villages and of the regeneration of the crafts and everything which is heritage, which is almost lost, and we have to pick up the pieces now which are still remaining. And I think Bosse has right saying that the culture, or probably Connor told that the culture is the fourth pillar of sustainability. I think it is not just the fourth pillar of sustainability, but it is the driver, it is the wheel. And if culture will be lost, then in all sense of culture, then we cannot talk on sustainability. So if the Ecomuseum could make steps toward the regeneration of this culture, then it is really a great thing. Thank you for
I
for
think
this
that's a very
presentation and everything.
strong and important message to end on. I'm aware of the fact now that we have held our speakers, respondent, an audience for almost 2 hours, and I suspect this conversation could easily go on for another 2 hours. So is there anybody with a burning question? Because if there isn't, then we might call the meeting to an end. No, I don't see any other hands coming up. So listen, it remains for me on behalf of Uniscape to thank our two speakers from tonight and our respondent, May. It has been an absolute pleasure to meet you. As I said at the start of the lecture, we welcomed the fact that we ended on a high note. There was a nice bit of symmetry between this particular paper and the previous one last month, where Sándor spoke about Lake Balaton as well. So, I mean, you've done an enormously good job for the tourist industry. Will all be flocking to the Ecomuseum and all watching with interest as it develops. So with that, just to thank everybody, and you'll from us in September, when we recommence the series ahead of our conference in Florence in the middle of October, which will then mark the end of the year of the 20th birthday of the European Landscape Convention. And just on that note, to note the kind of the geometry and the relevance of having May as our respondent, as a person who works on the edge, who works at the interface between policy and people between government and communities, and how what we're trying to discuss here and at all the other fora in Uniscape and across the network is how this piece of soft legislation, this agreement, this convention can actually meet the people, the communities who it is intended to serve. And so we saw today the model of the Ecomuseum, the model of the Landscape Observatory has also been mentioned a number of times. And I know right across the network and outside it as well, there are people who are working hard to close that gap, to make the aspirations, the high aspirations of these conventions, various conventions, meaningful and kind of meaningful in a positive way for the lives of the people who they're intended to serve. And so we're advancing that now very much here in this series, and we'll continue to do so. So thank you very much. We wish you all a lovely break over the summer. Most of you are academics in some form or another, so the summer might offer at least some respite from the pressure that we've all been under, particularly in the COVID-19. So it's been a pleasure to meet you all, and thank you so much.